Amy Adams gave us one of the blandest Lois Lanes in live action. For 3 movies, her whole character was just reporter in love with Superman. But Rachel Brosnahan finally brought the personality and edge the character needed, thanks to her amazing performance and Gunn's script in the new Superman movie. So how did we go from a lifeless love interest to the best live action Lois Lane yet? There are 3 reasons that explain it. The first one is each version's personality. Since the 70s, Lois has been written as a selfish, fearless reporter, competitive to a toxic level, and desperate for recognition from everyone around her. She even shows a bit of hypergamy, since before learning Superman's real identity, she always ignored Clark, thinking he was a weakling. She's so obsessed with her job that she'll put her life on the line just to land a big story, and she'd sell her own mom to get famous. We see that in the New 52, when she reveals Superman's identity. And in Heroes in Crisis, she publishes an article about a secret rehabilitation center for superheroes just to get a scoop. Because of all that, she can come off as pretty unlikable. But the thing about her is that she only lets her guard down in private, with the few people she actually trusts. That's when we realize her constant need for attention comes from her daddy issues, and that she can be really caring. In Japanese terms, she's not too far off from being a tsundere. You might think Amy Adams' version is a solid take on all this. At the start of Man of Steel, she heads out in the middle of the night to investigate a Kryptonian ship, even after a general warns her the temperatures at that hour are deadly. She's ready to die for a story, which is exactly the kind of thing comic book Lois would do. In fact, she only survives because Clark saves her from a robot attack in the ship. Something similar happens in Batman v Superman when she travels to the Middle East to report on a civil war in Kondak, and once again, Superman has to rescue her. For the rest of the movie, she digs into Lex Luthor's conspiracy, even though it puts her job and life at risk, since there are corrupt politicians working for him. But that's where the good points stop, because that's the only personality trait they kept. Well, that and the fact that, for some reason, she's in love with Superman. We don't know if this version of Lois is funny, serious, if she gets nervous under pressure, or if she puts work above her personal life or the other way around. We don't know what value she stands for, or even why she became a reporter in the first place. The only thing we know about her is that she's a
Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter.
In Man of Steel, her investigation into the mystery man who saved her at the Kryptonian ship leads her to Smallville. There, she discovers Superman's identity. This is a story that would make her the most famous reporter in human history. She has the scoop of the century in her hands, but in 2 seconds, she decides to drop it, apparently to protect Clark and Martha. Comic book Lois would face a huge moral dilemma. She'd have to choose between chasing the fame she thinks she deserves and sticking to her search for the truth, or protecting the private lives of 2 complete strangers. But there's nothing like that, because she never even questions if she should publish the story or not. This should have been a defining moment for her, because she's walking away from her dreams to protect 2 people she barely knows. I get that they wanted to make her more empathetic than in the comics, but they completely erased her competitiveness and her ambition to be famous. And to make it worse, she doesn't even let her guard down in private. They could have at least made her nervous during her first interview with Superman, like Kidder was in the '78 movie. That would have shown us she just acts brave all the time, but she still gets flustered around the guys she likes. It would have humanized her instead of leaving her as a blank slate. The same thing happens in Batman v Superman. Here there are 2 scenes where Superman is down and needs comfort. First, he's moping after the Capitol explosion. He says the whole Superman idea is a fraud, and is about to quit being a hero because he feels like he failed. This was the perfect moment for Lois to explain what Superman means to her and inspire him to keep being a hero. We could have seen things from her perspective, understanding how she sees the world and why someone as distrustful as her would put blind faith in an alien meta-human. But instead, Lois just rubs Henry Cavill's chest, like any of us would if we had the chance.
A handsome, muscular man.
After Lex kidnaps Martha, Lois gets another chance to explain why superheroes matter to her and to the world, when Superman tells her nobody stays good on Earth. But Amy Adams stays silent, because she doesn't just drift away from the comics. She literally has no personality, probably because neither David Goyer nor Chris Terrio had the slightest clue how to write an interesting female character. But with Brosnahan's version, it's the total opposite. She oozes personality in every single scene she's in. I know she's also a reporter in love with Superman, but it goes way beyond that. In her very first scene at the planet, we see her arguing with Clark. She tells him it's way too much of a coincidence that Superman always gives him interviews, and later at her apartment, she calls him out for being unprofessional. She's against Clark interviewing himself because she's a journalism purist and feels like Clark is insulting the profession. Sure, she's willing to lie about Clark's identity because she gets that Superman is doing good, but that's where she draws the line. She thinks her boyfriend is cheating by publishing self-interviews, and she's not okay with it at all because she's competitive, confrontational, and her job eats up her life. That's why she goes head-to-head with Clark during the interview, even knowing he's going to get mad. She cares more about landing an exclusive on Superman than keeping things smooth with her boyfriend. The second Clark says he's doing a good job because he's answering well. Lois starts hitting him with tougher and tougher questions, almost hoping he'll slip up. It's not that she doesn't care about her relationship at all, but this version of Lois is just as distrustful as in the comics.
The Moravian government maintains they're freeing the Jarhemporians.
You know that's very silly.
I do?
Right before Superman surrenders and Luthor traps him in his pocket universe, Lois tells Clark that her nature is to distrust everyone, and she can't help it. She confesses that she became a reporter because she's desperate to find the truth, and that's why she can't stop doubting everyone, even her boyfriend. That makes her a great journalist, but it also makes her personal relationships a mess. That's why she says she knew from the start that their relationship wouldn't work. Just like in the comics, this version of Lois struggles to connect with people emotionally. She prefers to keep a wall between herself and everyone else, so she doesn't have to open up, something we didn't see at all with Amy Adams. Just like in the '78 adaptation, this version of Lois is all about work, which is obvious when she dumps half a pound of sugar into her coffee. Gunn plays it as a joke, but it really shows that she downs insane amounts of coffee because she works non-stop for hours without sleep. The important thing is this version of Lois has a very distinctive personality, and she doesn't just exist as the love interest for the main character. I'd pay to watch a whole series or special set at the Daily Planet with Lois and Jimmy as the leads, even if Superman didn't show up. But I wouldn't even pirate a spin-off with Amy Adams writing articles, because her character is flatter than Cyborg's character arc in Whedon's Justice League.
Boring.
The second big difference between the two is the role they play in the story. Back in her first appearances in the 30s and 40s, Lois was just the damsel in distress, there to get rescued by Superman and not much else. Things didn't get any better for her in the 50s and 60s, since writers mostly turned her into comic relief, throwing her into one ridiculous storyline after another. She only really started to contribute when John Byrne reinvented the Man of Steel in the 80s, usually by exposing Lex Luthor's shady businesses or other mob bosses. That way, she could complement Superman's adventures with her investigative skills, uncovering things the Man of Steel didn't have time to track down himself. At first, Amy Adams' version seems pretty solid. In Man of Steel, they gave her a whole subplot where she tracks down the man who saved her at the Kryptonian ship, which worked great to show her investigative side in action. She proves she's a good reporter, and it also helps sneak in flashbacks of Clark's childhood in a smart way without interrupting the story. I'm pretty sure Christopher Nolan had something to do with that, because it's a trick he's used plenty of times in his movies. I can even buy Lois interviewing Superman when he turns himself into the army after the Smallville fight. In the real world, they'd probably have tried to torture him to get information, and there's no way they'd ever let a journalist spill intel about a global security threat. But within the movie, it kinda works, because by that point, another journalist had already leaked that Lois was the only one who knew Superman's identity. So far, so good. But the problem is that after this scene, Lois has nothing to do in the movie. For some reason they never explain, Zod takes her onto his ship, where she talks to Jor-El's ghost, and somehow takes down 3 of Zod's elite Kryptonians. Then in the third act, we see her helping soldiers and scientists figure out how Superman's rocket works so they can use to stop the world engine. This might have made some sense if Lois were a linguist who could decode Kryptonian, giving her a role similar to the one Amy Adams had in Arrival. Or I could have bought it if Jor-El had explained how the ship's tech worked, but that's not the case because Lois can't even turn it on.
You can't do anything!
In an attempt to make sure she wasn't just the damsel in distress, they shoved Lois into these boring, forced, and unnecessary subplots just to justify her sticking around. But it didn't really work, because in the end, Superman still ends up saving her over and over, just like in the character's earliest appearances. The same thing happens in Batman v Superman, when she tosses a kryptonite spear into a flooded floor, and 15 minutes later, Clark has to dive in to retrieve it. They could have cut both of those scenes and nothing would have changed. But they needed Lois to do something, so it looked like she was contributing to the plot. This gets even worse in Justice League, because Lois is literally just a plot device that Batman uses to calm Superman down, since she's his only connection to humanity. We'll talk more about that in a bit, because that whole idea has a bunch of problems. Brosnahan's Lois is the complete opposite, because Superman doesn't have to save her even once. In fact, she's the one who saves Superman in the second act, and she doesn't need to turn into a superhero or grab some Kryptonian weapon in a random, out-of-place scene. Since she's worried about her boyfriend, she asks the Justice Gang to help rescue him, and convinces Mr. Terrific to go with her all the way to Luthor's pocket universe.
Supposed to go in all the way!
Title of your sex tape.
If it weren't for Lois pushing things forward, Clark would have had a hard time escaping that prison, because the portal back to Metropolis never would have opened. But the best thing about this version of Lois is her role as a journalist. From the very start of the movie, we see her investigating the Baravia conflict, because she suspects Luthor is involved. Jimmy tells her Lex is making money by selling weapons to Boravia to keep the war going. But Lois discovers that Luthor Corp is giving weapons away to the Boravian government, which means Lex must have some stake in this beyond just making money. After Jimmy reconnects with his ex, it's Lois who realizes that Eve's photos hold evidence of Luthor's plans, and she's the one who pieces it all together. Turns out, Luthor was happily funding the conflict because he had an agreement with Burkos to hand him half the invaded country so he could found a new nation where he'd be the absolute ruler. This investigation leads to an article that Lois dictates out loud while piloting Mr. Terrific's ship, and that's the move that takes Luthor down. I know Superman takes down Lex's muscle by beating Ultraman and the Engineer. Mr. Terrific seals the dimensional rift, and the rest of the Justice Gang stops the invasion. But even after all that, Luthor is still confident he can win. He tells Superman the government gave him authorization to kill him, so he's only lost a small battle in a long war. His real defeat comes when the Daily Planet publishes Lois's article, and every outlet brands Luthor a traitor. Not only he ends up in prison for his deals with the president of Boravia, but his public image is completely destroyed, and people start trusting Superman again. Clark wouldn't have been able to put Luthor behind bars, or change the way the public saw him. All of that happened because of Lois and her work as a journalist, which makes her absolutely essential to the story. By the way, if you like these kinds of comparisons, don't forget to subscribe. I've got plenty more versus videos like this one coming up.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
And now we get to the third reason, the most important one, the relationship between Lois and Clark. I can forgive it if the main character's love interest isn't super interesting on their own, or if they don't add much to the story, as long as the relationship works. But Adams and Cavill just don't work together at all, because they have zero chemistry. Every time we see them on screen, it's just two really attractive people smiling, but they never convince us they're a real couple. We don't even buy that they're into each other, like we do with Peter and Gwen in The Amazing Spider-Man, or Tony and Pepper in the Infinity Saga. Their kisses feel cold, and the bathtub scene in Batman v Superman is more awkward than romantic. It doesn't help that we're never told why they fall in love, or why they even choose to be together. I can get that they're physically attracted to each other because they're both gorgeous, or that Lois wants to be with Superman because he's literally the most powerful man in the world. But there's no romantic subplot to justify why they love each other. Their first kiss in Man of Steel feels completely out of place, since they're making out right after Zod's world engine killed thousands of people in Metropolis. They're having a great time dancing on the graves of innocent civilians.
But Superman didn't even apologize.
This only gets worse because their relationship never develops. We don't know what either of them adds to the other's life, or why Clark chooses Lois over any other woman. With the way this Superman was written, it would have made sense for Lois to be his tether to Earth and his emotional connection to humanity. Remember that Snyder wanted to portray Superman as a messianic figure, feeling distant from regular people and conflicted about his role as a superhero. His relationship with Lois could have been the part of him that kept him human. Maybe that's what they were going for in this scene, when Clark tells Lois she's his world. But since we never get any real reason why they enjoy being together, that line means nothing. It would have been way more convincing if Superman had sacrificed himself to save his mom, because throughout the whole movie we're told that both Superman and Batman have deep, important bonds with their mothers. Even Luthor says Martha is the most important person in Clark's life, and Clark never denies it. But I dare you to tell me in the comments why Clark wanted to marry Lois, other than the fact that Amy Adams is super hot. And before you say their relationship was supposed to develop in those sequels that never happened, let me remind you that the original plan was for Lois to cheat on Clark with Batman. She was supposed to have Bruce's kid, who'd grow up to be the new Batman, and Clark was somehow fine with the whole thing. Maybe I'm even more distrustful than comic book Lois, but I get the feeling this creative team never planned to treat this couple fairly. That's pure injustice.
Say that again?
Brosnahan and Corenswet's relationship is radically different, because these two actually have chemistry. Just look at Lois's face when Clark is about to kiss her in her apartment. It looks like they're really making out, like they're an actual couple. It's no coincidence James Gunn had them do a chemistry test with the argument scene. In that moment, we see how they interrupt each other, how they improvise, and how they react to each other's emotions. The whole time, we believe they're a real couple who love each other, but who also have problems. I know the comparison is a little unfair, because we don't see the start of their relationship. We don't know if Lois fell for Clark first, and then found out he was Superman, or if she was into Superman and then realized he was Clark Kent. But what we do know is that they constantly clash because their worldviews are completely opposite. Even though they both work at the planet, Lois thinks everyone's got some evil hidden agenda, while Clark believes deep down that people are good. More than once, Lois comes across as way too cynical, like when she tells Clark maybe he shouldn't have gotten involved in the Boravian conflict, because Jarhanpur's government might actually be worse than Burkos's. But Clark is way more naive, and trusts the people of Jarhanpur because he can't see any malice in them.
Could we ever trust them completely?
These clashes make them fight, make Clark storm out of the apartment in the middle of the interview, and even make Lois think about breaking up with Clark, because their thing doesn't seem to be working. But it's these opposite views that actually make them work as a couple. Clark helps Lois see that people can be good, and that you don't have to distrust everyone. And at the same time, Lois is a true anchor for Clark, showing him that not every human is as good, honest, and beautiful as he believes. In this scene, it's clear they meet in the middle, realizing they're both a little right. It's the best kind of couple, because they balance each other's flaws, instead of just being together because they look like supermodels. This relationship is just one of the 5 things James Gunn changed to make his Superman work so well. If you want to know the other 4, you've got to watch this video.
I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter.